Okay, so it's 12 o'clock, it's Thursday, and it's time to talk to Internal Audit. Welcome, glad you could join me for a chat to consider how we're going to face some of the challenges that COVID-19 is presenting to us on an almost daily basis. So glad you could join me. For those of you that are not familiar with the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, or are new to anything that we do, it's the Chartered Institute is the only professional body in the UK representing and supporting internal auditors in the UK and Ireland. We have approximately 10,000 members across all sectors of the economy, so private, public, financial, charities, whatever. And our members are part of a global network of over 200,000 members in 170 different countries, all working to the same international standards and codes of ethics and our international professional practices framework that gives us consistency in terms of our professional work, how we approach things, etc. So thank you for that. Today, I want to look at real-time active assurance, but I'd like to split it into two areas, if I may. I want to look at general real-time assurance, opportunities to learn from others, talking to colleagues, those sorts of things, and then specific real-time assurance within your organisation. And the latter one is perhaps a little more focused around COVID-19. So when we talk about general real-time assurance, we talk about things like learning from others. What do your competitors do? What is happening in your market sector? What can you learn from things that have happened, events that have happened that are perhaps outside your market sector? So, for example, I always use the Wells Fargo scenario. Wells Fargo, one of the largest banks in the US, exemplar in terms of risk, governance and internal control, held up as the bank against which all others were compared and contrasted. They had, as you may remember, in probably, I don't know, it must be 2016, 17, they had a significant issue, regulatory breach. CEO lost their job, 5,000 staff, 5,000 plus, I think, lost their job. The issue was around staff incentive schemes. So if we are looking at providing some real-time assurance, what did we do as an organisation, as an internal audit function in our organisation? Did we immediately think, could we be the next Wells Fargo Bank? Should we look at our bonus schemes, our staff incentive schemes? Are they driving the right behaviours? What can we learn? What level of assurance can we provide to our board and audit committee? Then we had Carillion, and there were some brilliant examples from that scenario in terms of the lessons to learn from an outsourced internal audit function. And if you look at our internal audit code of practice that we've just issued for the private and third sectors, we talk about in there making sure that if you outsource, if your organisation has outsourced its internal audit function, that within the organisation is someone who assumes the responsibility of the chief audit exec, head of internal audit. Because some of the challenges they have was they didn't report to the audit committee, they didn't follow up on recommendations made, they didn't have a plan and a charter approved by the audit committee. So how can we protect our organisations if we're thinking about outsourcing or even co-sourcing? How can we do something different? And then the one that happened a little more recently, which was the Patisserie Valerie. Most of us, I presume, have had a wonderful cake and a lovely cup of coffee from Patisserie Valerie over a period of time. What did that tell us about our organisation? So were you asked by your CFO, by your CEO, by your audit committee chair, could we be the next Patisserie Valerie? So could your CFO be behaving inappropriately, moving money to the Cayman Islands, to bank accounts, etc. One of the heads of audit I spoke to was telling me that they had, as soon as that story broke, they'd gone down, they'd spent probably an hour, 90 minutes maybe, with their CFO, talking him through the processes and procedures that were in place and what was happening that meant that couldn't have happened in their organization. And also, don't forget, they would have had knowledge about financial controls based on previous work that they did. What they then did was produce an email. Doesn't have to be anything more than that they sent to their audit committee chair, their CEO, to say, based on some work we've done, we can provide you with, and be careful here, a reasonable assurance that what we know about financial control, what we have just discussed with our CFO, we believe that we will not be the next Patisserie Valerie, that those set of circumstances could not happen in our organisation. That was extremely well received by the chair of the audit committee, and he actually said to the head of internal audit, this is great, this is what we want more of, real-time assurance. Something happens, you look at our organisation, you tell us that we're okay, that we have all of the things in place we need to. So this is where I was coming from when I was talking about general real-time assurance. So do we do that in our internal audit functions? Do you do that? Do you look at what's happening elsewhere? Do we learn the lessons from that? And do we take some degree of immediate action to review processes, procedures, controls that enable us to provide an assurance to the key stakeholders in our organization? And how can we do things that might strengthen our profile across the organization, strengthen the relationship that we have across the business in terms of understanding the challenges? So within internal audit functions where I've headed them up, what I have tended to do was allocate to one of my team responsibility for browsing the internet, browsing the quality press to see what are the stories that are out there. What are the lessons that we can learn from what's going on in our sectors, in our geographical locations, or across the globe, in terms of what we need to think about to help us provide that assurance up to key stakeholders. As I said to you, the new Internal Audit Code of Practice has a particular point in there around what we need to be thinking about, talks about having access to management information. I hope that we all have appropriate access to management information within our organisation, information that helps us understand the challenges that the organisation is facing, and therefore then helps us to put together an approach that helps the organisation immediately understand what the challenges are. So we need to factor those into our thinking. The other thing we talk about, as I said to you, is if it's outsourced, who in the organisation is linked to or assigned responsibility for checking to make sure that there is reference at audit committees to the internal audit. So are you included in that conversation? And one of the pieces of work that we've done recently and produced some thought leadership for on our audit leaders site is the relationship between the company secretary and the head of internal audit. And often you will find the company secretary acts as secretary for the audit committee because part of their responsibility is to ensure that the audit committee doesn't act ultra vires. They don't act outside their remit. So perhaps the relationship between you as head of audit and your company secretary, director of legal, helps you understand what the challenges are so you can prepare for them. The other thing that we need to be thinking about and monitoring is we need to reflect on what our regulators are saying. So currently, if you look at some of the key regulator sites, so be it the Care Quality Commission in relation to the healthcare sector, be it the FCA in relation to the financial services sector, one of the things that you will see is that they are talking about COVID-19. They are telling you what's happening. They are telling you what they intend to do. So most of the regulators at the moment are saying we're not going to be doing inspections. It is not the time for us to visit organisations and undertake inspections. But COVID-19 is very much on our agenda, and we will be coming and seeing what you are doing and have done in this space in terms of learning from others that are out there and providing some degree of assurance to your audit committee. That's what the regulator will be looking for in terms of internal audit. So we need to make sure that we have that framework in place. Do we have a mechanism in place in terms of reviewing our methodologies, our processes and policies based on what other internal audit activities are doing? So one of the things that I am sure you're all engaging with at the moment is all of the webinars that are going on, that all of the sectors and regulators are offering in terms of information that they are happy to share with you in terms of moving things forward to help you face the challenges in relation to COVID-19. So are you talking to anyone? Are you learning lessons? I was on a webinar this morning offered by Protivity, and they had a psychologist on there. And one of the things that he said that chilled me a little to the bone was, you have to think of COVID-19 as a training day. He said, what will come down the track with regard to climate change, disruption, digitization is going to make COVID-19 look as though it is nothing more than a minor glitch. That I find actually quite scary, but there might be some sense in that. So do we, as part of what we are doing now as internal audit, are we thinking about our processes, our procedures, the structure of internal audit? Can we do things differently? Can we be smarter? I have a polling question up for you at the moment about making changes to the scope of an audit whilst we're undertaking the audit. You have your terms of reference, you've articulated the scope of your audit, what's in scope, what's out of scope. Do you make changes if it's appropriate? Or do we tend to be very single-minded and stick to what's been agreed? The days of single-mindedness potentially gone. We need to be way more flexible so that we can really give value to our organizations. So that's the sort of thing I wanted to talk about in terms of general real-time assurance. So let's think now about specific. So we're in the current COVID-19 pandemic. Organizations, internal audit functions are very much in new and challenging times. As you can tell, I'm a mature lady, and I haven't seen anything like this in the 30-odd years, 32 years I've been in internal audit. So I think this is something really quite unusual and quite challenging from an internal audit. So we have, perhaps as you've seen, a COVID-19 hub. We have got a whole raft of technical guidance there for you, blogs, views from colleagues, views from other professional bodies, and it's all open and available to everyone. So have a look at some of that information. Also, what's on there is the notes from our heads of internal audit virtual forum that happens weekly, and therefore I would ask you to please have a look at that and see what you can pick up from that might be relevant. So what do we mean by real-time assurance in the current climate? Well, I'm aware of CEOs, audit committees, asking internal audit to look at new processes, new procedures, and provide at least a verbal indication of whether or not the processes work and whether the controls in place are appropriate. There is unlikely to be any sort of report around this that will go up the chain to the audit committee. Therefore, what do we need to think about in terms of making sure that we feed back to the audit committee around what it is that we have done? Let's just put that on hold for a moment, because what I also want us to think about is some internal audit teams have been furloughed, and some internal audit teams have been furloughed when the rest of the organisation hasn't. Question, does that mean that perhaps the organisation doesn't see the true value of internal audit? What can we do as internal auditors to change their mind in terms of what we are doing? So we need to think about what that means, how it happened, what we ought to be thinking about. We also need to think about internal audit's role, not just about looking at new procedures and providing some degree of verbal assurance that those are working, but what about other things that we might be doing? So internal audit might be asked to work in the first line. So some of the challenge then will come. So we're working in the first line. We are supporting the business. Perhaps we're manning phones. Perhaps we're processing applications for loans, for furloughed staff applications, whatever we are. Actually, what if we discover something in that process that causes us to be concerned? So perhaps existing processes and procedures are not strong enough. Do we immediately have to escalate that up the line to senior management and to the audit committee? I think we have to be very careful here. If we see something that is fundamentally flawed as part of what we're doing on a daily basis now, then we have to think about how we escalate that. But we also need to think about the relationships that we have with our organisation, with our senior management team. And if there is a perception that, well, okay, you're working in the first line, but actually you're just a mole in the camp, you've come to see what we're doing wrong so you can tell everyone, that's not as helpful as perhaps it might be. So let's think about how we can share messages about providing assurance real time, here, now, about what we found and how we highlight those things. We might have, as I know from talking to a head of audit in the NHS, he had a couple of his people who were trained paramedics. As you can imagine, they've immediately been taken by the business to fulfill their role as paramedics. So he's down some staff. So the internal audit function could be part furloughed. It could be split across the first, second lines, and yet you as head of internal audit or the internal audit team remaining are still expected to deliver some sort of assurance. But I'm certain that you won't be working through your 2020 2021 internal audit plan that was perhaps approved by your audit committee in January. I think what you will be doing is looking at new and emerging risks, providing assurance now, and it probably won't be beautifully presented PowerPoint reports. It may well be, as I mentioned earlier, an email to senior management, the audit committee, to tell the business what the issues are, what your concerns are and why. Protiviti, who is a partner of the Institute, has created a piece of guidance on active assurance, which you can find on our COVID-19 hub. And what they are saying in that piece is they give us 3 pieces of advice. One is stay relevant. So now is not perhaps the time to do your accounts payable audit. Stay relevant. What are the new and emerging risks? Support the business. remember, our mission is about the success of your organization. So fulfilling temporary roles, first or second line. Respond to change and uncertainty. What will your organization and internal audit look like when we come out of COVID-19? So start thinking about creating a report, if you like, or a plan for your audit committee for senior management that will talk about what you did during the lockdown and what you are proposing to do now coming out of the lockdown. Think about resources across the organization. Can you leverage on some of those resources to help you identify some of the key risks, work with the organization to think about mitigation in relation to those key risks? Active assurance, real-time assurance, needs us to embrace an agile, holistic approach. Who better than internal audit to look across your organization, providing that these are the key risks coming forward. Have we mitigated them? Which are the ones that are potentially going to cause us problems, particularly perhaps around regulatory breaches? So think about those. And what is the changing risk profile of your organization? So we need to think about things like a dynamic risk assessment. What's happening now? What are we doing? What are we saying? Are we talking to our risk people? What about technology? Are we using technology? Yeah, absolutely. This wouldn't normally have happened, I'm certain. We're using technology to conduct audits through things like Zoom, Teams, WebEx. I was on something today called Blue Jeans. I've never heard of that. A whole load of different technologies, but also remember the security elements. So Zoom has been in the press a lot about security. So if you are going to use this technology, make sure that the technology is robust. Think about control monitoring. Are we looking at key controls across the organization? People in your organization will be poorly, self-isolating, maybe off because of bereavements. So have we got gaps in our controls? And again, are we feeding that up now? Not storing it up for later and producing a report, but feeding back now. You've got some key control weaknesses and thinking about it. So what I wanted to think about in terms of the imperatives of real-time assurance, I wanted to say there are three key things as takeaways. Real-time changes to the internal audit plan. I think we're all living that on a daily basis at the moment. The ability to gather information from different sources and use it to assess the control environment in a real time, here, now, and make changes to the scopes of audit whilst undertaking that audit to make sure that the audit is relevant to what we're looking at. So I have covered the key things I wanted to say to you, but what I would like to say is thank you very much for your time. May I ask you, if you have colleagues, friends who have not been able to log in to now at 12 o'clock, please remind them that the live stream is available through the Institute's Facebook account afterwards, so they can watch it later at their leisure. Also, the Institute is over Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Just follow what we're doing, because at the moment we are doing a lot to support our members. So you will get information about events coming up. So for example, I think I mentioned at the beginning, there is a Galvanize and Institute webinar about the impact of internal audit on COVID-19, which is next Thursday, no, maybe not Thursday. Anyway, it's the 29th of April, whatever day it is. So maybe worthwhile signing up for that. You can do it on the COVID-19 Hub. I'm also always happy to take questions. Email me at liz.sandwith@iia.org.uk. I'm on LinkedIn if you want to ask anything, any questions, etc. What I'd like to ask you to do is join me next week. Next week, we are looking at independence and objectivity. Perhaps a fairly straightforward topic, but I want to explore some of the challenges for internal audit around those two topics next year. Next week. So please join me next week. Don't forget to bring your coffee. Haven't got mine this week. I've got water instead. But don't forget to bring your coffee or your lunch. I don't mind. And remember, talk to Internal Audit, because I can promise you the Institute is listening to what you have to say at the moment. So thank you so very much for your time. Hope you found this helpful. And most importantly, please stay safe. Have a good day. Bye.